Welcome to yet another episode of Voices of Vayana podcast. Our guest for episode 2 is Ramaswamy Iyer, the CEO of Vayana. With years in the financial services industry, Ram has been at the forefront of driving innovation and building successful businesses. We're honored to have him join us today and share his insights and experiences with our audience. I'm your co-host Akshaya Shankar.
And I'm your co-host Rashmie Sriraghavan. And let's get started. Okay, starting off with the first question. Hi Ram, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and what inspired you to become an entrepreneur? And coming to Vayana, how you identified a gap in the market and basically how you came up with the idea?
I started in business in 94, which is about 29 years ago. At that time it wasn't called entrepreneurship, I guess. I did my MBA and then I did about 2.5 years with a consulting firm called Anderson Consulting, which is now called Accenture. And consulting is kind of a little boring, right? I mean, all you do is produce paper. So I was looking for some excitement. Went and met an interesting company in Bangalore at that time in a small office complex in Koramangala. Met the 5 or 6 co-founders there. They kind of showed me that space. They showed me what they're working on. And more importantly, I think I was struck by the excitement in their voice. And I think that's when I probably decided that this is much more fun than working for somebody. And it's kind of creating something. So that company was Infosys back in 93. And then in 94 on Valentine's Day, I think I just quit what I was doing. Met up with an old engineering friend of mine and we started our first business. First contract was writing software. Of course, we didn't know how to write software, so we kind of talked to a few friends to help us to make that software, and I think that's where the software journey started. And that was the beginning, I think, of this entire 29-year journey of cash management, supply chain finance and all that. And interestingly, our next client was actually HDFC Bank, which was just starting in 94. And I met all the guys who started that business. And in one of the discussions, I remember I was talking to Mr. Puri, talking about what we do. And he said that, whatever you do, be in the chiller business. What he really meant was do things that are transactionally heavy, which require people use every day, which are low value, but something that creates a lot of engagement. And I think that's later on, of course, the Google guys made it the toothpaste theory and all that. We started in 2017 and basically I think just moved along that path.
So what was the first big breakthrough moment with Vayana?
Oh, this is a really funny one. Oh, Vayana, is it? Okay, actually, my first breakthrough moment, I must tell you, is not Vayana, but my first startup. Okay. So we were we were 4 co-founders then, and we were loitering around in Nariman Point in Bombay. And we saw this nice tall building. It was the Express Towers. And we looked at this SBI logo there. So out of a lark, we were eating, I think, some sandwich on the roadside. There's a PCO machine there, and we just called up some board number, and they connected us to somebody. And we said, we are ex-IIM people. Nowadays, like people make cow milk and say we are ex-IIMs, right? Yeah. That time we said we have a bunch of people who have started and we are ex-IIM IIT guys and we want to meet you. And they said, oh, very good. Why don't you come now? So then we said, oh shit, we can't tell them we can come now because it looked like we're just waiting for that outside. So we said, no, we have a meeting now and we'll come back after some time. So we went back to Marine Drive, loitered around there for an hour and then kind of came in. So that I think was probably my... the most gotcha moment, I guess, in that whole space. In Vayana, I think, a whole bunch of things, but I think the important thing really is that what people saw us was, I think, very different to what we thought we were doing. And I think it was probably people saw us as really helping them to get money on a day-to-day basis. We had obviously, ideas of putting up a platform, connecting banks, enterprises, supply chains. But people just saw it as very simple, right? Every day I need money for my trade and these guys somehow make it happen. I think that was, it actually seems very obvious, but it was, very different, I think, realization that came along in Vayana.
So the next question is kind of more to the people side of things. So you mentioned how earlier you needed something, you reached out to a friend who you kind of like, okay, they can come in. But say now there's been some type of progress in the journey. We're still in the early part, but there's some progress and you're thinking of building a team, right? So how do you assemble your team? What qualities do you look for?
So I think, look, I mean, my thought process has always been I meet a lot of interesting people along the road. I may or may not have anything for them, but if they are interesting, they are curious, I find them very, nice to talk to them. And then I get to know them better, and then I usually get them to come into Vayana. That's been a very simple process. And once they come into Vayana, then I think about what they can do. Because I think one interesting thing, or one danger I think in most companies is that we kind of create an echo chamber, right? Obviously, people are very similar to us, people who think like us, people who create or have similar systems like ours, and then you kind of then become very templatized as a company. I think what I really like about Vayana when I look at it is that almost everybody is a very unique person by themselves. Each one has a very different way of approaching life. So I actually love the fact that if I meet somebody who thinks absolutely differently from me, or is very different from what I think about, then I would love to have him in the team. Creates a lot of very, I think, interesting debates. I think general logo we have is to be curious, right? So I think anybody who's curious in whatever they're doing, I think I'm really interested in. Yeah, there's also counter to it. I mean, you have to be honest about it. And not everybody will behave the way you like them to behave. But that's part of the course, right? I mean, I think you really have to look at it as what strengths people bring in. I think a lot of time we spend a lot of time looking at weaknesses. We will find out reasons why somebody we shouldn't like. I think it's very interesting when you start figuring out everybody has some strength. If you can tap into it, that's fine.
Yeah. So our next question is a little more serious. So just want to understand how you manage to stay innovative and how you continue to grow Vayana in this competitive market. Not just Vayana, how you grow a business in this competitive market.
Look, I think first and foremost, I think one thing that we were taught in our B school, which is I think the only thing that I really picked up from B school, was to really understand the problem you're trying to solve. I think one of the big mistakes most companies do is that we all figure out a problem to solve. We create a solution, then we become very invested in that solution because that's what brings us revenues. And then we start protecting it, making sure that nobody else can compete with it. All our thoughts is about defending this patch of land that we have kind of created. And somewhere we lose sight of the problem. I think the interesting thing for me is been always to keep track of the problem we're trying to solve. And problems are not static, right? I mean, what I started off maybe 29 years back, that's not the problem we solve now. The key question really is that how do you kind of keep on redefining the problem that's relevant, and then keep figuring out what the rest of the world does. One thing, as a kid, I read this non-fiction book by Arthur Ailey, correct? And it was a book called Final Diagnosis. And there's the last two chapters, the last two pages of it is about an old doctor who gets thrown out of the hospital because he commits a lot of mistakes. And he's handing over charge to a new guy, and the advice he gives him is that please lock yourself 2 hours in a bathroom and read. Keep up to date with what's happening. Never ever lose sight of it. Never let the administrative side of your work kind of take you away from it, because if you're not up to date, you will lose relevance. I think that's a lesson I've taken to heart.
I think one thing that you mentioned about how we go defending that piece of land that we have, I think that's so important, but that's so hard. And I know from personal experience, I feel like now after you said it, I just suddenly was thinking, and I feel like so many times I just defend what I've done rather than thinking about like what the issue is.
So that's a very nice line, right? When you listen to somebody, do you listen to reply or listen to understand? I think almost every one of us listen to reply. Right? And that takes us away from understanding. A lot of people in the company and outside the company will send you messages that you may not like. But if you can kind of focus and figure out what is the real substance of the points that they're making, then you're listening to understand or reading to understand. I think that we get so caught up with our personal ego in that sense that if someone says something, then it's harmful to us. I think if you are too tied to what you've done and you cannot be dispassionate, you will always defend. People defend what they really think they own. I think ownership is a double-edged sword. Yes, you should feel passionate about what you've done. Every one of us has to be craftsman. But it doesn't mean that you will refuse to take the chisel, break down the sculpture and recreate it again. I think that is something you'll have to figure out.
So the next question kind of comes from like staying relevant and moving to stay relevant, in the sense that if you stay still, you're only moving backwards, right? So talking about Vayana and the particular how has it impacted the industry it operates in? And what changes have you seen in the market, like in the past couple of years?
Look, I mean, first and foremost, I was talking to a bunch of students yesterday, and they were asking me, how did you get investment into the company? And I was telling them that moment 5 years back, you should tell someone you are in B2B or supply chain, people would just drop off to sleep right away. Or for some reason, people would think it's very, very complicated. But I think, a lot of times we are just, I think, bound by our perceptions, right, of what we have understood or relate to. And I think the question of being relevant, or the question of kind of growing in this business, or ensuring that we are still seen as someone bringing a lot of innovation into the business, is to kind of break it down into very simple problem sets, right? Look, I mean, one of the big myths in this industry, and I'll just talk about our industry and what has changed. I think when we started, everybody used to say that people don't have access to credit. Right? I mean, that's the standard. Every event you go to, every PowerPoint you see, it will start saying that MSMEs world over have some X $1 trillion or some credit gap. Meaningless numbers. Honestly speaking, credit has always been available. It may not be in the form and shape we understand, but it's always available, even to the smallest little guy. The question really is it affordable? So the real problem that we have defined for ourselves is access to affordable credit. And I think that is a problem set that, really speaking, banks obviously can solve it because they have access to cheap funds. But I think fintechs, as a general rule, I'm not really focused on that problem. Where I think fintechs, we are focused on distribution, on time to onboard. We talked a lot of friction points around the problem. We have not really taken a hard crack at the problem. How does a small little mom and pop shop selling paint, electrical, hardware, how do you give him credit at 50 paisa a month? Right? For every 100 rupees that he takes credit for. If you can solve that, then you have some relevance to the market, you have some relevance to that poor fellow. Otherwise, you are just saying, look, I have a fancy app, I have some dancing pie charts on my phone, and use this, and in 2 seconds you will get credit. But if you give him credit at 1.5 rupees a month, effectively he's only going to take 50 paisa back home. Is that enough for him? So I think that's the way I look at this whole definition, right? I mean, at the end of the day, growing, being relevant, what has changed. I don't think the problem definition has changed so much as people putting a lot of noise to the market.
So, what is Vayana's approach to partnerships and collaborations, and how do you think this contributes to its growth? Because currently there are so many upcoming players in this particular segment. So, just want to understand a little bit about that.
Yeah, so long back, when I sent a note to my investors, I said Vayana model is going to be around build, acquire, and invest. Right? So we will build some stuff our own. We'll acquire other people who have built something better in some areas, and we'll invest in some people where we think the market will move towards that direction. And I think that's what we've done. If you look at our history, we have acquired 2 companies, 2 products. We have invested in 2 companies, and we have built a lot of stuff ourselves. And I think that's the approach. At the end of the day, look, I mean, if I really wanted today to sell to very small mom and pop shop businesses, the question I have to ask is, are we as a DNA of the company geared to that? Right? If we are not, it's better to then team up with someone who actually has that DNA. The problem is never technology or product. I mean, we cannot create a technology or product very easily. I mean, I don't think that's the challenge. I think the challenge is to have DNA within the company that will go after that. I think it's impossible as a company to say that we are going to be one-stop all in all aspects that we want to do. I think as long as you recognize that, and you recognize that other people smarter than you in certain portions of the business, I think you will figure out how to team up with them.
For the next question, I kind of want to address the fact that, you're kind of on this mission, or like there's this kind of problem that you're trying to like pick apart. And there's certain things which can kind of put you on a wave and push you forward, and there's certain roadblocks that can hold you back. And when it comes to fintechs, I think regulation has always played a big part. And so on that, I want to ask, what have been the biggest regulatory challenges and benefits that you have faced, or in general fintechs face in India, and how have you navigated these challenges?
So look, I mean, one of the bonus points we have as a company is that most of the people who were part of this company had a lot of experience in that domain. We were bankers or technologists or whatever it is, and we had an habit of reading all the circulars put out by regulators. So to an extent, I think we actually understood the lay of the land, because now obviously with the last 6 months there's a lot of talk about how regulators have come and torpedoed a lot of business models, disallowed certain stuff. Actually, they have not said anything new. They only reiterated what they had already published, which I think most people had just decided that they would not look at it, or if they looked at it, to ignore it, or to assume that the regulator never really meant it. And so I think to that extent we steered clear of all those issues. But I think overall, from a regulatory point of view, there are only 2 points I always make. I think one, any regulator anywhere in the world, I think the simplest thing that anybody who is setting up a business and getting investors to invest in, we demand consistency. We need a clarity and consistency about what is the role they define for us. And they will be consistent across many years on it, because we are asking other investors to come in and put money. And second, I think there's a challenge to regulators across the world, whether to regulate entities or to regulate activities. A lot of central banks have gone the entity way, like I think to a great extent Reserve Bank also has, which is to say that if you're a bank, we'll regulate you this way, if you're an NBFC, we'll regulate you this way. If you are a player in the regulated space like a payment aggregator or somebody else, will regulate you this way. As opposed to saying that payments will be regulated this way or payment aggregation will be regulated this way. So there's, in fact, right now in the country, I think there's a small mixture of both of them happening. And that is a little unnerving to me. I mean, I think people should be very clear about, my own bias would be towards activity-based regulation, because it doesn't matter who does it. Right? If I'm transferring money from point A to point B, then I should have a regulation that says this is the only way you will transfer point A to point B, and this is your responsibility, this is what you're accountable for. I think if that comes in, I think it will be a lot clearer. People can create business models around it.
So now that we're done with part 1, we move on to part 2, which is a funner round, which is the fun rapid fire round. So here we'll just ask you Google's most asked questions about Vayana, and you have to tell us the answer to these pressing questions.
It's terrifying that Google knows about us.
That people have asked. So these are just the 5 that we picked that we found really interesting. So the first question is, what is Vayana's revenue? Everybody wants to know. This is the most asked.
Yeah, so we can't answer it. Very simple, right? So we can't. Obviously, we're a privately held company. We have investors.
All right. Now here's the second question.
And this is word or not what we have said. This is what people have asked on Google.
Right. So, is Vayana a boring company? What is the company culture? Tell us.
So I don't know the culture. Honestly speaking, a lot of people ask me the culture. I think it's, so we defined 3 sets of, at least I defined, I don't say we, about values that I thought we should all be. We just said we should be nice, we should be curious, and we should be yourself, right? I mean, have a sense of identity about your own. And that, the counterpoint to being yourself means the culture will be different in different pockets. I think we have a city culture, we have an office culture, we have an, by profession culture. So I think we have many cultures in the company, and I think I love it.
The next question is, who is going to succeed R&D Iyer at Vayana?
I don't know, it will be probably a process, yeah. I think the investors have a call on that. But I think we have a strong management team. I must admit that one of the persons sitting here in front of me I've interviewed, who made a very clear ambition to kind of take over from me. So maybe that is that person, who knows. But honestly speaking, I think we have exceedingly talented people. I think the interesting thing for me, I think first and foremost, I would like to make Vayana an institution. And I've always believed that's my ambition, at least my personal ambition, that it has got a certain way of approaching life which is institutionalized in the company. Now, whether you call it culture, you call it values, I don't care, whatever it is. But it's just that we will not assume that what we did yesterday is good enough today.
So the next question is, and this is the last question, is Vayana in Wayanad? Where are the offices otherwise?
Well, I wish it is, it could be in Vayana, because one of the things that you guys probably also know is that we have never been a very office-bound company, right? Right from beginning, the idea was that it could be anywhere. And I think Vayana never happened, though I have been on vacation there and loved to visit there. The internet was not so great that time, last time I went. But I think it's wherever the people are, yeah.
And with that, we've come to the end of yet another exciting episode of our podcast series. We hope Ram Iyer's podcast has inspired you to take on new challenges.
So keep dreaming big and never stop pushing yourself to new heights. We'll be back soon with more exciting stories and insights from the world of business and beyond. Until next time, stay curious and stay inspired.